All right. Good morning, everybody. It is just 10 o'clock here. We're going to start off with a quick poll to see where people are in thinking about their needs assessment. We have a lot of brand new folks, so this might be the first time you're really starting to think about it, and that's fine. We're hoping to provide some useful guidance for those who are just getting started. We do have a range of participants registered. Like I said, a lot of new people, some people mid-career, and a few veterans, so to speak. So we should have some great discussion. Maria, if you could put up the poll, that would be great. While you all are taking a look at this poll and answering, letting us know where you are in your needs assessment journey, I'll introduce myself. I'm Catherine Webb Martinez, Director of Program Planning and Evaluation, and I'm here with a few colleagues. Vikram?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Vikram Kaundinya. I'm a CE Specialist, Expertise Area Program Evaluation with UCANR, and also an Associate Professor of Extension in the Department of Human Ecology at UC Davis.
Thanks. I have my team member, Jen Siddell, with us, who will be helping in a breakout room, and Siavash, who's an advisor, who's going to be helping us in a breakout room. So thanks to you two. And then we have a wonderful advisor speaker today. Irene, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Good morning, everyone. Irene Padasas, advisor here, based in Tulare, but I also cover Madera, Fresno, and Kings counties.
Our second speaker ended up being called into jury duty, so she recorded a video for us. So we'll have two speakers, one of which is live and one of which will be a recording. Let's go ahead and show the results of the poll, Maria. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of folks just beginning to think about it. That makes sense. Like I said, a lot of people indicated 0 to 2 years with UCANR. Some people are just starting to think about how they're going to collect the data and what to ask. We will be covering that as well today. And we do have some information on how to use your needs assessment data to design and focus your program. So we'll be touching on all of this today. I think you saw the results. I'm going to go ahead and move us along. The first part will be a presentation from Vikram and I. He's going to cover some basic how to approach your needs assessment. And I'm going to share some cooperative extension examples. We have many more examples posted on our webpage, and we'll be sure that you have that link by the end of this training. We plan to take a short break, and then we'll have our speakers that I mentioned, and we'll wrap up with some small group discussion so you can do some peer-to-peer learning and networking. By the end of the training, we hope that you will have some understanding of the basics of needs assessment, why it's part of your job description, what it is, how to do it, and when you do it. Vikram will also cover some basics around writing good needs assessment questions. We do cover writing good questions in our measuring outcomes training as well. And we want to make sure that you understand how to use these findings to help you as you design and begin implementing your research and extension programs. And then you'll get some feedback, like I mentioned, from your peers on where you are with your needs assessment plan. So Vikram, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this training. So first of all, let us see what is a needs assessment. So when you think about needs assessment, it is the very first step in your overall program planning process. It is an essential step without which you really can't have a robust educational or research program. So it is an essential step in planning your programs, developing your programs, and also for evaluating, right? Like if you base your programming on systematic needs assessment, it doesn't need to be formal. Even informal needs assessments can be systematic and comprehensive. We'll get to that in a little bit, but I just want you all to understand that it is an essential step. And then it is basically driven by the question, what do clients need? What do your clients need? And how can those needs be met? So it's just that kind of a very simple evaluative thinking logic that can help you with your needs assessment. And the literature is replete, and also we all know that one of the first priorities for any new county extension educator or a specialist is to conduct a needs assessment and base their programming on that data. And then it's also been identified as one of the key educational competencies for extension educators in the sense that it is expected that the county extension educators and also the extension specialists are competent to the degree that is needed in their jobs. Next slide, please. So when you think about approaches, there are two approaches to needs assessment. We usually use the traditional needs assessment that is focused on what is lacking or what is a need or what is a problem in a community that we're trying to collect. And then we develop research or educational programming to address it. But there is another approach, which is an asset-based approach, where you are focusing on what is available in the community, what is a strength, what is you're not focusing on what is lacking. It's not that you will not collect what is lacking, but the main focus is on the strengths and a kind of analysis after that to see how you can leverage those strengths. So this approach can help identify the available organizational, community, fiscal, and individual assets that are there in the community. So an asset-based needs assessment is a useful tool when we don't know enough about both the assets and needs in the community. But if you want to take this approach, you'll need more time and slightly more qualitative data analysis expertise. So think about it, think about what will work best for you. And then if you want more help, we can talk about it. Next slide, please. You want to talk about this example?
Yeah. We do have a number of examples that we've collected, and Irene's going to be sharing about her asset-based approach. We often see this approach taken in the youth and community development areas. That's not to say it needs to be limited to those program areas. This is from a county director who did this for Sacramento County. So this top part is just a snip of the survey where she was asking about how important issues were in that community to better understand what cooperative extension needed to focus on. And the bottom part is a separate snip on another page of the survey where she was asking about what the assets are in the community to really get a good understanding of the need in that county at the time.
So when we think about when to conduct a needs assessment, so these are some of the situations where you can conduct a needs assessment. When the program is brand new, right? Then you need to conduct a needs assessment to see what is needed for that program to be successful. And then also when you are new to the job, you may have already some reports from your predecessor. So you can explore all of that, right? It doesn't need to be primary data all the time. You can use secondary data also. I'll get to that in the next slides. And you have to conduct a needs assessment also when you want to learn more about what your clients need related to a specific condition. So you already may know that there is a specific condition, but then conducting a needs assessment in that situation is also very important. And when you need to document the latest needs for your funding purposes to keep your programming and research, like a teaching and research programming going, you need to conduct a needs assessment. And also when you need additional information to communicate with your stakeholders, conducting a needs assessment will be good. And then finally, if the program evaluation focus is on how well your program meets the needs of the intended audience, then also you need to conduct a needs assessment as a baseline. Next slide, please. So why should we conduct a needs assessment? There are different potential uses. It is definitely needed for developing your program, right from goal setting to evaluating your outcomes and then reporting the impact. And also this is very helpful when you submit your performance appraisal. You need to indicate how you collected needs and why you are choosing to focus on particular education program or research program. It can also be used and developed as a collaborative statewide or a regional needs assessment. You don't have to do it all by yourself every time. And this can be a commissioned study sometimes, or it can lead to a journal article. We have a couple of examples later. And as I said, like to justify requests for funding or when you're submitting RFPs for grants, it is very helpful data to have about needs. And then when it's a collaborative research project also, it can be useful. And it can also help with identifying partners or community organization collaborators. Next slide, please. So if you want to conduct a collaborative needs assessment, like a regional multi-county needs assessment, there are some benefits to that. So it can help with better understanding of needs at a bigger picture or a regional level. And also you can address the shared goals more efficiently. And then you can leverage subject matter expertise. For example, if something comes up as a need, which is not really your the number one expertise area, then that's helpful to have a collaborative needs assessment. And also when you have limited resources to address programming, it's better to go for a collaborative needs assessment. And a collaborative needs assessment can serve as a strategic planning tool for other program areas. Also, we have examples from 2 program areas that we'll share in the next slides. Next slide, please. So I'll share the first example, and Kathleen will share a dairy example after this. So this is from a recent UC Cooperative Extension's Climate Smart Ag Educational Needs Assessment. So this is slightly different in the sense that it is not conducted by a county extension advisor to inform their programming, but it is from an USDA grant, and it has multiple UCCE partners. The purpose was to identify the climate smart ag education needs of growers in California. And the purpose was to use this data to develop education programs for growers. So we used a mixed methods, like we use surveys, focus groups, and we are kind of getting to the individual interview stage now to collect needs assessment data. The survey was sent to more than 12,000 farmers, and we had a very low response rate. That's one more reason to use mixed methods. We only had 340 usable sample. So the benefits of conducting this study, the needs assessment study, was it will inform the extension and research programming of the diverse team. We had this project is being led by Tapan Patak, the climate adaptation in ag expert, specialist of UCNR, and myself and Steve Ostoya at UC Davis. We led the needs assessment phase. And then the outputs have been like, we already published 1 journal article, and 3 articles are under review, and we have presented at conferences, both on the methods, like how we conducted a participatory needs assessment, and also we presented the results. Next slide, please.
I'm going to share this dairy example. The main takeaway here is that we've learned recently that they are doing it again. And so if you work together, you can then think about refreshing what you've done in the future as a group as well, once you've sort of established those relationships. So this is a handful of dairy advisors about 5 or more years ago, and they wanted to identify the dairy producer needs and how best to deliver the extension information to that audience. They did get a list from the California Department of Food and Agriculture to identify the producers, and they sent a survey. They also did a peer-reviewed journal article, and I imagine they're planning on updating that with the new version that they're in the process of doing right now. So why are they doing it again? Well, like everything else, things change. And they were explaining that the dairy landscape has changed in terms of number of farms, farm size, et cetera. And they just wanted to be sure that they were addressing the current needs and see, technology also changes. So making sure that they're providing the information in the most effective way to that audience at this point in time. So they're deploying the same survey. So once you've, again, done this, it might be very efficient and effective to just sort of refresh it and do it again. One other thing I wanted to mention about this particular effort that I learned is for this audience, price of milk is always the #1 issue. And although that's something that cooperative extension can't affect, they do include that in the needs assessment survey just to understand how the other issues that we can address fit in compared to that top issue. So something to think about. You don't only have to include issues that you think you or your colleagues will be able to address.
So the next thing we wanted to focus is what are some first steps for the new advisors when they think about needs assessment. Our guest speakers will also cover some of these points. So the first steps are find out what is already known or available. So please see any reports that your predecessor has left, or any recent reports from counties or any other governmental sources or any other reliable and valid sources to know what is the current situation in the counties that you are serving. And then the basic thing, get out and introduce yourself. It's very important for the community members to know that a UCC person, a cooperative extension person is there trying to help them with their things. And then develop relationships with the community members and also all the institutions, because as we all know, extension is all about building relationships. And for us to be successful extension professionals, especially at the county level, it's very important to develop those relationships with the counties that we serve. And then take your time and clearly define your clientele, because it's very easy to kind of get drawn into too many things. There can be situations when you see that, okay, you can do a lot of things, but you all have only limited time and resources. So clearly define your clientele. We'll get to the some of the priority setting filters that you can use later in this presentation. But it will be very important to pick those top 1, 2, or 3 areas that you want to focus on, and define your clientele very clearly and indicate that in your performance appraisal in the first year or second year. And then get the lay of the land, right? Like try your best to get the lay of the land. This can be the primary crops in your area, or the primary institutions in the area, or farm rate value, anything, like just getting an understanding of what exactly is the situation in the counties that you will be serving is important. And all this will inform who you should kind of reach out to for needs assessment data, and also to what to ask about needs. So these steps will be very important. Next slide, please.
We wanted to share that there are several different examples of UC Cooperative Extension introduction letters that are posted on our needs assessment webpage. And they vary from just, you're just getting started. Maybe there wasn't this sort of program in that community, or there had been a big gap. So you might just be introducing yourself. You can also take the approach that Fadzai Mashiri used here, was introducing herself and letting her clientele know she's conducting a needs assessment. So you can kind of combine those in one effort. And we also have other examples of just some language to use when you are introducing that you're doing a needs assessment, like a survey intro letter.
Okay, we wanted to kind of just focus a little bit on best practices for community engagement. That is when you go out and interact with people for collecting your needs assessment data. So there are some best practices the literature suggests, and also in my experience has worked. So taking a participatory approach is always good for developing, pre-testing, analyzing any questionnaires that you'll develop to collect data from community members. Taking a participatory approach in the sense that showing these questionnaires to them, pre-testing with them is always good. And also when you have the data, when you have some preliminary analysis done, it is good to have good to share that with your community, like a subgroup or at some meetings, and try to see if it is in line with what they think their needs are is good. And always tell that you are a UCN or a UCC person. That will help with credibility, especially with the trust factor, because of our reputation that we don't have any vested interests other than science kind of work. And then specify the purpose of the study, why you are collecting data. That's very important. And also definitely discuss how their participation in this needs assessment would contribute to improvement in others' lives and their communities, right? So it is beyond their individual contribution helping themselves. If they see that it can help others also, the participation can be more. And try to avoid subordinating language when you send out your questionnaires. I have an example in the next slide. Next slide, please. So this can be an example of a subordinating language, right? For us to help solve the school problems in your community, it is necessary that you participate in the study. It kind of appears like a dominant approach. So a better alternative will be, will you please be part of helping to solve the school problems in your county? Your responses can assist the county residents and school administrators in fully understanding the issues facing the schools here. So any such kind of better alternatives, submissive language is always good. Next slide, please. So then a few other best practices, establishing trust is really important, as I already covered in the first steps for the advisors. And always ask for advice. There are community members who have a lot of experience and wisdom, knowledge living in that community. And stress that the opportunities to contribute to the study are limited. Like it's not that you are just reaching out to everyone in the community, you are reaching out to a specific clientele, and the programs that you will develop will target their needs. And also convey that other people in the community are also participating so that they'll know that it's a participatory approach. And when appropriate, if you have grant money or some kind of other resources, then using incentives as social exchange is always good. It doesn't need to be a monetary incentive all the time, but if you have grant money, that can also help. Next slide, please. So when you think about needs assessment, there are 3 phases that you can kind of think about, and then this is the activity that we will be working on later today. So phase 1 is exploration. That is where all your thinking, your brainstorming is happening, why you want to conduct a needs assessment, what will be the potential users, and who the clientele, as I said, the audience is. And definitely explore secondary data sources, because in my experience, I've found that people don't give sufficient time and value to secondary data sources that are already there. So if there is a report that is kind of still current, it can give you very good needs assessment data. So please don't ignore that. And then also think about what and how to collect, right? What methods you use and what data to collect. And once you have thought through all of that, then it is the assessment, the implementation of the plan. So you collect data, analyze data, and then synthesize data. And the most important phase, which is not stressed enough in most of the needs assessments, is the utilization phase, right? So use the data to set your program priorities. As I said, you'll often end up with more needs than what you can tackle. So it is very, very important for you to identify 1, 2, or 3, top 3. And then Catherine will cover later some criteria that you can use that the UCANR, our organization, has developed. And then develop an action plan to address these needs and issues, and definitely communicate the results back with the people from whom you collected the data, so they know that, okay, their time was well spent. Next slide, please. So our next 20 minutes, we'll talk about some commonly used data collection methods in needs assessment in extension. Next slide, please. So what we'll do is I'll share the method. There are many more methods than this, but these are the most commonly used. So I'll share when it is appropriate to use this method. And then if you choose to use this method, what are some best practices? And then Catherine will share an example from within our UC cooperative extension. So as I said, secondary data is very important. The document review, literature review is really important. And then the primary data, when we think about collecting from our clients, it is individual interviews, then focus group interviews, key informant interviews, observation, and surveys. Next slide, please. So some other considerations given increased virtual methods these days, especially post-pandemic. Many methods can be done now online, so it's time efficient and also can make the data collection easier. So you can do these Zoom interviews with stakeholders nowadays, right? There is a transcription, right? It transcribes. And also you can do the video interview. And then we all have access to Qualtrics through University of California extension system, right? So you can use that if your clientele is capable of taking an online survey. And then you can build on existing meetings. So some of the meetings are online now. For example, the commodity board meetings, and then several other like Facebook. So there are several virtual options now. Next slide, please. So the first method, I wanted to start with this because again, I want to emphasize the importance of secondary data. So this is basically the content analysis of existing information. There is a little to no participant burden in this. The little burden will come once you identify some data, some needs from the secondary data. Then it is a good practice to go back and check with your clients if this is still current to their needs. So if you decide to use this method, some of the best practices are You can have an audit trail, some kind of a systematic documentation is also important. Select some criteria, what you want to focus on, and then theme them accordingly. Next slide, please.
We'll be talking throughout the training about a best practice of using mixed methods. So you'll see most of the examples that I share use mixed methods. In this case, Natalie Price, this was a while ago when she first did her needs assessment. She leveraged the existing secondary data like Vikram was talking about. And in her field, that included county health improvement plans, health center community needs assessment. So needs assessments conducted by other community partners you can look for, and then other relevant health data and policy reports that may come from agencies in your area. I do want to mention that in addition to that secondary data, she did informal interviews, both internal with advisors and with specialists. She went to campuses to meet with the specialists and with statewide program directors, which was relevant for her field. And then she also conducted external meetings and interviews with key partners.
So the next method is individual interviews. This is very commonly used in extension. So you can use this method when personal contact is desirable with the people and when your sample size, like the group, is smaller. So to reach out to each person. And then also when your clientele is unlikely to respond to a written survey, given the survey fatigue, the response rates have been very low these days. And also when the sample has people not capable of taking, like especially an online survey or even a paper survey, then you can consider these interviews. And also you can use this when you are not very sure what is most important to potential respondents. You can keep it open-ended and you can use this method. So if you choose to use this method, some best practices are state the purpose upfront. So this is a best practice for every method that you use. And be consistent and neutral with all the people that you interview. Definitely use probing questions. So these are not questions that will lead the responses in a particular manner, but these are questions to get rich information. Sometimes people just give answers like yes or no. So when we want more rich information, we have to use probing questions. And then this is I don't see this recommended in literature, but I have used it in my work and found helpful. So you can use this if you want to, like sending questions in advance has worked well for me because they get time to kind of go through the questions and be prepared, better prepared. And then one other thing I want you all to know, especially if you are not already experienced in conducting interviews, there can be very chatty people who will drag us to give our opinion. So it is not the purpose of that interview, right? Like, so we have to get answers from them. So please be thinking about that. Next slide, please.
This is an example from Elizabeth Fitchner, who's an advisor. And one of the things we wanted to share with this method and other methods is, and with measuring outcomes too, we often encourage people, and it's fine to use informal methods. So although these are interviews, they can often be conversations, keeping in mind the points that Vikram made. And again, the key here is to systematically document the data you collect through these methods. So in Elizabeth's case, she really found a lot of benefit in piggybacking on existing meetings for a couple of reasons. So these were grower and processor meetings, which are her clientele. She went directly to these meetings to interact with these individuals who she identified as having, as she said, the finger on the pulse of industry issues. And one of the benefits there was she was hearing what the needs of the industry were, she felt like, versus hearing the needs of specific individuals. Another lesson she learned is, taking this sort of convenient sample approach. She felt like it really reduced the burden on her clientele, which she liked. One other lesson learned from her is, and this may be true for many of you covering multiple commodities, there wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. So this may work in certain circumstances, but with other clientele, you may need to take different approaches to your needs assessment data collection methods.
So the next type of interviews is key informant interviews, where you select a few people who have experience and wisdom living in the community, often a mix of people, and then interview those people. This method can be used when you want to verify collected data. So when you conduct a needs assessment, you often, as I said, end up with a big list, and some of it can actually include wants, not just needs. So it is important to understand what is a need and what is a want. So if you talk with some key people in the community, that will be helpful. So it can also get you inputs from knowledgeable and influential people in the community. These can be people who are not directly associated with the issue, but they know enough about the issue and have lived in the community. And also this method can help you explore unanticipated ideas. So if you want to use this method, I would suggest that use it in combination with another method. Have a mix of people, right? When you talk about focus groups, we'll see how it has to be a homogeneous group. But for key informant interviews, it can be a mix of people. And often I have found that 10 people is sufficient. By 7th or 8th person, you will reach saturation of themes, meaning that you will start hearing the same things. Next slide, please.
Just a quick pause. Oh, we've got a few questions showing up in the chat, which we can address as they need, but one was specifically related to key informant interviews. And what is the best way? Is there a standard specific way to present those results?
So Jill, is it like after you collect the data? Is that what you're asking?
No.
That was my question. Yeah. Just how would you represent that data? How would you present it?
So is it the key informant interviews or any general interviews?
I think any general. I was really specifically looking at the informational ones, but yeah.
Yeah, so it is just like any other qualitative data analysis, right? So you collect information. So your data is all the answers that are shared by the client, the people that you reached out to. So then you'll code that data for commonly coming up themes, right? Like you extract those themes, what is coming up as a common thing, or the dominant themes, right? Like what is coming up. Like if you ask people what are the barriers or what are some needs, and then there is a theme coming out, right? It can be related to cropping, or it can be related to some other community issues or that kind of a thing, and then present those results. We have a qualitative data analysis training coming up that will be led by Jen Seddle. So if you can attend that, then we can revisit. If you have any specific questions, you can please reach out to me and I can share more resources and examples of reports.
Great, thanks. And we will address the questions in the chat a little bit later once we get through the slides. So this example also uses mixed methods. And in this case, actually, it was a collaborative needs assessment with the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension because it was in the Lake Tahoe Basin. So the lake crosses the two states. So your needs assessment may be, like Vikram said earlier, regional or statewide, or it may even be multi-state like this case. We were just talking about qualitative data and analysis. This group actually took the approach of using all qualitative inquiry methods. So one of which was key informant interviews. They also used agency meetings, so kind of piggybacking like the Elizabeth Fitchner example. They also conducted focus groups, which Vikram's going to talk about next. And they had some workshops to collect data. What they were really looking at was gathering input from their partners and other wildland science end users on what the local priorities were for disseminating, in this case, wildfire science. And they were working to structure a new consortium. So they felt like they wanted to do these qualitative approaches to explore some areas where there wasn't existing data. Let me see if there was anything else I wanted to say. Oh, briefly, I would just mention this report is posted on our webpage, so you can see that there. And just we'll talk a little bit about timeline and other resources needed. But in this case, this was a more rigorous report approach. It started in August with these key informant interviews, and then they wrapped up with a proposal and plan by December, January. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay, so the next method that is commonly used in extension is focus groups. These are group interviews. You can use this when you want to understand common issues or needs. It is best if the sample is homogeneous. I know that focus groups are being used with heterogeneous samples also, but according to literature, it has to be used when the group is homogeneous, meaning all the people are being affected by a similar issue or a need. And you can use this method again when you don't know what questions to ask yet, you are new. And also, if you want to know more from a survey responses, you can conduct these focus groups with a subset of survey participants. And this is a great method to foster trust and relationship building. We have done a lot of focus groups within UC Cooperative Extension. And this can also be used to piggyback off existing meetings. I have a video link there, YouTube. That is the focus group training that I've given to PhD students in my department. So if you're interested, you can watch that. And also I have a handout having all the points of some best practices for conducting focus groups. I'll put that in the folder that will come out, my handout, to you all after the training. So if you decide to use this method, so it is good to use it with 6 to 12 people. 10 can be manageable for a 1.5 hour interview. And when you do this, definitely explain the rules of what a focus group is. Many people may not know. And then again, I have a handout that I'll share with an example. And then make deliberate efforts to get answers from everyone, because I've conducted several focus groups and I've seen that only 5 or 3 or 4 people dominate, and then other people are keeping quiet. So just try to kind of take an approach where you are making efforts to get answers from everyone, but do not force anyone to answer. Next slide, please.
I'm going to share this example from San Diego County. This is another collaborative approach. So Ramiro Lobo and Jan Gonzalez, she's a community education specialist. They were working with some of our statewide programs like UC Syrup and the Small Farms Network, and they were partnering with different county departments and trying to look at 2 things. So one was the goal to focus our research and extension work in the county. And then the county partners were really interested in getting information from growers about ways that they could best focus their own communications to that audience and also help guide local policy decisions. So kind of 2 big drivers for this collaborative study. In terms of the focus groups, what's interesting here is you can see they were postponed. And so a takeaway here is you may have your design for your evaluation, and then things may need to obviously shift during implementation. So they did a big online survey administered to all the farm operators and agricultural businesses in the county, so a huge audience. And during that time frame, some of the other partners were engaging the audiences in other methods and getting input. So that's why they decided to postpone the focus groups and the personal interviews to a later time. Vikram, I don't know if you have any update on a plan for future qualitative methods for this particular study?
No, I don't have any update.
Okay.
Yeah, so the last 2 methods left are, one is observation. We have been encouraging this quite a bit, like Catherine and I have been using this in all my projects. So when you want to observe practice or behavior and identify needs, it's very good to do that. And also, if you want to see and listen what the people have to say, going to their fields is important. And also, after you identified needs and recommended something to just confirm the fidelity of implementation, how they are practicing or adopting a recommended behavior, it's good to go to the field and observe. And some best practices definitely have an observation guide, but there are some culturally responsive factors Catherine will cover later that we have to keep in mind when you have such kind of a note or an observation guide in hand. Next slide, please. So this is an example. We developed one for observing an environmental education program at Elkes Ranch in our UC Cooperative Extension system. So these are some of the prompts that I developed with the educators there, and then I focused my observation on these prompts. It's not good to have random observations related to the outcomes of a program or even a kind of a study are important. And then we trained some students on how to collect this data. Next slide, please. So in the last method we wanted to cover today, surveys is still the most commonly used and popular method, and you can use it when you want to collect standardized information from a large sample. And also when privacy is important, you can completely anonymize the Qualtrics version, an online survey. And also when you need independent opinions and responses, you can use a survey. And when there are resource constraints, mainly time and money, we all have access to the online Qualtrics, we can use the survey. And again, best practices, as I said, be clear about the purpose in the very first paragraph of your email. Be focused, only ask what you need to. Keeping the survey as short as possible is really important. And definitely do review the survey with experts for validity purpose and do a pilot test for reliability purposes. And then just follow design principles like using page breaks, or if it's a paper survey, you leave enough space, that kind of a thing. Next slide, please.
So here's another example using mixed methods approach. Given we're talking about surveys, we just wanted to bring up some of your county offices have clickers, and many of you may have experienced those in your university classes. So Michelle shared a few things here. The clickers survey, she actually does that on an ongoing basis as a way to, keep her finger on the pulse about what are the, crop and topic interests for her to be focusing her extension program on and helping determine research topics as well. One of the lessons learned that she wanted to share here is, you may end up not having all the skills to address all the needs. And that's why we often work with our colleagues, or you can bring in obviously other speakers and partners to address needs, or maybe those are just things when we talk more about prioritizing that you don't focus on because you don't have the resources within your professional network to address those needs. And she also just wanted to make sure folks knew you may not have the time to address all of the needs, and the organization acknowledges that. So again, we'll be talking more about how to prioritize needs in just a few minutes. I'm going to cover the next few slides talking about making your needs assessment culturally responsive. And often in our organization, we have cross-cultural needs assessments in our diverse state. This also comes up when we talk about evaluating outcomes. So there's a couple things from the professional association that Vikram and I are part of that we wanted to share that, taking this approach isn't just a nice to have or an afterthought. It's obviously an ethical imperative that we think clearly about this as we get started and throughout the process. And again, it's not something where we're going to arrive at. It's an ongoing iterative thing. So one of the tips is to practice self-reflection. So just keep in mind, we should all be thinking about our own attitudes and biases and how we're approaching collecting data, how we're understanding the data. So working with different community members and partners to think about the most appropriate ways to get data and how to understand that data and even how to prioritize that data can be really important as you go through your needs assessment process. The last point here is around secondary data. So as much as we do encourage you to look at it, you may notice that it's missing some key pieces from particular groups that you've identified as your clientele, perhaps marginalized groups. So you may need to think about community organizations that work with those groups and see what data that they have, or just engage in conversations with them as you start doing your needs assessment. So thinking about, how might participant characteristics affect our needs assessment? Obviously language, and as an organization, we're working on, there's a task force looking at language and interpretation resources. So hopefully that'll get even better. We do have the news and outreach in Spanish and some resources currently to help translate things into the many other languages. There is a new map that's going to be coming out showing the priority or the main languages in different counties. So you can see, obviously we have a lot of Spanish speakers, but there are many other languages that may be more common in your particular region than Spanish, for example. So that map will be a useful tool. Age, abilities, that can affect the methods that you choose. Some things that we may not always think about as this third bullet are just how people react in different group settings. In particular, this can affect your focus groups. There was an example that I heard about in terms of family relationships. It was a grower focus group, and there happened to be the father and the son were there, and given some family relationships, they were talking about methods that they were using on the farm, and the son was not really comfortable talking about trying to change the methods in a way in front of his father because they shared the business together. So some things to think about. As an organization, we've gotten more thoughtful about other ways of knowing and doing. And so obviously we're a science-based organization. We've been working hard to partner and work with tribes and tribal communities. And often they have different ways of knowing and doing. And so really trying to be better listeners and learners. So just some things to think about as you develop your needs assessment plan. I did want to share this last example here from Margaret Lloyd. This was when she started out. She works largely with Hmong, and in this case, it was Lumen growers. And her approach was driving around. She works with small farms. She was driving around and meeting people. She brought a survey that she was planning on having them answer, but what she realized in starting to work with this group that was new to her, that having a paper survey wasn't going to be effective in collecting data. So she switched it to be more on-farm observation. So she was able to adapt the original survey to be more like that observation checklist that Vikram shared. So she was systematically collecting the data in a way that worked better for this particular audience. A couple lessons that she learned. She also found this was really effective for her to update her contact information in terms of being able to send out information as she began to implement her programs. And she noticed that thinking about the time of the year, when she started going out, it wasn't really the best time. Folks were busy. So she shifted this sort of exercise to a different time of year. So you will learn things, obviously, as you start collecting data. Different time of year may be an important thing to notice. All right, Vikram, over to you.
Okay, so I will cover this more in depth in the survey design, survey writing, like developing surveys training that's coming up in a few weeks from now. But these are some of the guidelines for writing good questions. There is a big list for more than 20 guidelines that we'll share as a handout. But just keep in mind, do not use any abbreviations, slangs, or acronyms when you write questions, even though it appears like a very common word for you. Do not use that. And avoid double-barreled questions. This is one of the most commonly observed error in survey questions. So you combine two different variables in one question. We'll see an example in the next slide. And also don't have questions that have unstated assumptions. Don't assume something about the community and then ask, do you have a high school degree or something like that? And also avoid leading questions that imply a desired response. Don't add any value to your question, attach any value to your question. People should feel comfortable answering yes or no, or giving positive or negative feedback. And avoid questions that may elicit embarrassment, suspicion, or hostility. Don't ask any sensitive information. And if you have to ask them, then there are some other ways or formats how to ask them. And make sure that your answer choices are mutually exclusive. Sometimes it can be overlapping 2 to 4 years. Then the next option, it will be 4 again. So just avoid those kind of things. And when you use like a scale, like agree to disagree or positive to negative, have equal variation on both sides of the scale, like have an equal number of disagree and agree items. And ensure that the question matches with the answer choices. Next slide, please. So we'll just take a minute. These are some of the questions that can be improved based on the guidelines that I presented. So just read through it, and maybe a couple of volunteers can share what their opinion about these questions. Do they think they're okay, or what is an issue with the question? So the first question is, research indicates that buying high salt foods is bad for health. Do you buy such foods for your home? Yes, no. Do you all think it is okay, or what is an issue with that question? Anyone want to share? So we have quiet people today. Yeah. So it's a leading
This
question.
is, oh,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
yes, no, I was saying this is a leading question because you are telling people what they need to know before you ask them, probably to cause biasness. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what I had as the guideline that's violated. What about the second question? Was your community's input taken and used in developing IPM extension programs in your county? Is it okay, or any issues you see? Yeah, Grant, there is an acronym IPM. What else? I think there is a bigger issue with this. Not that IPM, having that acronym is not an issue, but I think it is double-barreled, right? If the community input was taken but not used, it should be split into two different questions. And that is the most common error I see in almost all the surveys that I review. What about the third question? To what extent do you utilize nutrition information from UC A&R advisors to inform food purchase decisions? Yes, somewhat, no. Do you all think that question is okay, the way it is written? Yeah, Grant, yeah, the rating scale can be better. And also, I think the answer choices are not matching the question, right? Yes, no, do not actually match with the in the way the question was asked. Okay, so this was just to get your kind of thinking going. We'll cover this a lot more in depth in the survey design training. Next slide, Catherine.
Great. So I'm going to just talk briefly about how to use the findings. So you definitely need to set priorities. We're sort of known in extension for being a mile wide and an inch deep, and we definitely want to try to avoid that as you're getting started in your career or just reassessing what you're working on. So you may ask your clientele in your needs assessment to prioritize their needs. Some folks do that, but even if you do that, they're not the only things to consider. The other point here is you can take a qualitative approach to analyzing with a variety of filters that will help you determine these priorities. So what are those filters to think about? And we do have a one-page resource that's posted that covers this in a little bit more detail, but things to consider include your own job description, your own expertise or the expertise of the colleagues that you work closely with, and other resources that may be available to you in your network or in your community. So focusing on things where you're able to address the issues. And then there's organizational considerations. We have our strategic vision that we've been working to update in a participatory approach. So keep an eye out for that. We have our public values, and we'll be talking more about those through our training series here. Then think about what's our comparative advantage as UC Cooperative Extension. If other organizations in your community are addressing a priority need for your clientele, then maybe you focus on something else where we're particularly positioned to make a difference. Of course, you want to know what's important to your clientele, and maybe certain issues are more of an issue in terms of frequency or the extent to which they affect your clientele group. So think about that. And then likelihood of impact. Is the science available to make a difference on that particular issue? Are you thinking that it's going to be possible, that there's going to be a solution that's going to be economically feasible? That's not the only thing to consider. But again, all of these things these filters allow you to take a qualitative approach as you look at the data and end up deciding what you're going to focus either your research topics on or your extension efforts. So just wanted to show a logic model. We'll be using this tool throughout our training series. We have a whole nother tab on this particular approach. It's just one simple tool to lay out your program theory. And on the left here is what we've been talking about today. So the situation, you're assessing the situation largely through your needs assessment, identifying the issues and the assets. engaging people in relationship building. What I just presented for the last couple of minutes is thinking about how do you prioritize what you're going to focus on for research and extension. I want to also introduce at the end of the logic model. So after you've done and thought about your activities to address those needs, we want to be thinking early on about what are the outcomes that you're trying to affect change on for your participants, as well as longer term at the environmental or the health or the economic level. And so thinking about that ultimate change, kind of largely about what you're trying to do throughout your whole cooperative extension career can also be another filter to think about helping you prioritize. So just wanted to introduce quickly the logic model. And again, we'll be talking more about this throughout the training series. Welcome back. It looks like it's 11 o'clock on my clock. This is often everybody's favorite part of our trainings is when we have speakers join us. So we're going to kick it off with Irene, who was able to be with us in person, and then I will show a video recording from Grace. So over to you, Irene.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. I am Irene Padasas, Community Nutrition and Health Advisor here in the Central Valley, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share my work with you today. Many of the things that I will cover in today's training are overlapping with what Vikram and Catherine presented earlier. So just to give an overview on that. Next slide, please. I thought it's important to start with an overview of my academic responsibilities to provide some context in terms of the direction and also purpose of the needs assessment that I did. And probably just like many of you, I also came from out of state. I actually came from Nebraska and then moved here to the Valley when I started in my current position in June 2022. My programmatic work, obviously, as you can see here, is within the broader health topics of healthy lifestyles, health equity, food and nutrition, just to name a few. But I also function as the local PI and program supervisor for 2 federally funded nutrition programs in Tulare, Kings, Madera, and Fresno counties. Next slide, please. Because of these very broad scope of my work and also being not from the area, I really put effort in learning about the local context, specifically the culture in my first 3 months in the job, and also connected with other advisors to gain a better insight on the process. So I started my needs assessment in September 2022 with 2 very general goals. So first is to determine research and programmatic gaps that are aligned with my academic responsibilities, which I shared earlier, as well as understand factors in improving health and wellness in the community. So for this work, I use both primary and secondary data. Next slide, please. Okay, it's overwhelming. As you can see in the screen, I categorize the data for my needs assessment based on 2 overarching academic responsibilities. So the first phase of the needs assessment was largely focused on reviewing the nutrition program's evaluation data outcomes and also publicly available quantitative data to understand county level information, demographic information, and also determine data trends on age, gender, income level, geographic location, and ethnic and racial differences, to name a few, on key health outcomes of interest. So this phase in my needs assessment largely informed the approach I use for my qualitative data collection. And one strategy that I heard from Vikram and Catherine earlier that I found highly helpful was between reviewing the literature and the quantitative data and planning the qualitative part of the needs assessment was basically what most advisors like us are doing on a regular basis, which is attending county and community meetings, which help me understand who or what key local government agencies and community-based organizations work around the area of health and the nature or scope of health services they provide to the community. So for the second phase of my needs assessment, as you can see here, I conducted interviews with our nutrition educators to understand the implementation processes of the nutrition programs. And I also did a small qualitative study on Hispanic Latino health beliefs and practices. And because Tulare, Kings Madera, and Fresno counties are largely comprised of Spanish-speaking residents, and I don't speak Spanish, I presented the goals of my qualitative study to 4 leaders of Hispanic Latino serving community-based organizations here in my area to get their feedback about the study approach and also about the interview questions. So these community leaders really helped me recruit 35 adult participants, language translation, and even provided some cultural framing on key findings in the study. Next slide, please. So putting together the quantitative and qualitative findings of the needs assessment, I identified my 4 priority areas. So first is provide ongoing administrative and programmatic support to UCC nutrition programs. Next would be provide academic leadership in county-based coalitions and health-focused committees to initiate more policy systems and environmental changes in the counties. Third would be expand community partnerships to conduct research and deliver extension-based support with or for local schools, community-based organizations, and government agencies. And last would be use indirect education to provide communities with accessible and relevant health information materials. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of the work that I tied to the needs assessment findings. So I deliver in-house training, ongoing in-house training for our nutrition educators. I also lead the MOUs with program sites to ensure consistent and ongoing programming at the local level. I also serve in different committees and in one of the health equity advisory board in one of the counties I serve. I also co-chair a coalition. And then I also work, and I saw Ricardo here, I work with Ricardo and Amira Resnick, our statewide director, on the COVID-19 vaccination campaign for indigenous Mexican communities here in the Valley, and also put together some handouts that I distributed to a lot of the parent resource centers here across the 4 counties. And I think this one is, I find it very helpful that after I did my preliminary analysis, I went back to the community-based organization that helped me with my study and presented them at least the preliminary findings of the qualitative study. Next slide, please. So you can the diagram that you could see on the left side, that's something that I came up with after going through the needs assessment. And I think moving forward as an advisor, especially as a newer advisor, it's important to have this kind of framework in terms of the work so that it's structured very clearly. So some of my takeaways. So what are my takeaways from doing a needs assessment? First, I think Vikram and Catherine also mentioned this earlier. Start with publicly available data relevant to our area of work. So start with the low-hanging fruit, meaning easy to obtain and accessible data that can provide new advisors like us some understanding in terms of the lay of the land. Second, the needs assessment can be considered an integrated process in community partnership, which is a key aspect of our work as advisors to ensure buy-in and ongoing programmatic work in the counties. Another key takeaway is that needs assessment can be an opportunity to reinforce the importance of research-informed work or programs in the community. So as I mentioned earlier, my qualitative data collection had been successful because of the help of local community leaders, which only show the value they put in research-informed work that would benefit our community members. Next slide, please. Needs assessment is also not solely about finding gaps, echoing what Catherine and Vikram was mentioning earlier. It is an opportunity to understand existing assets that could help jumpstart our work as new advisors. So for me, from doing my qualitative study, I identify our highly passionate and enthusiastic nutrition educators as key assets in terms of, the success of our nutrition programs, or potential collaboration opportunities with other A&R statewide programs like Master Food Preserver or Master Gardener, or existing programs in the counties where we could provide our academic expertise. And then last but not the least, needs assessment, just like any strategic processes, takes time. So it requires that back and forth preparation, planning, and information gathering. And I do think there's really no one set way to do it. So maximizing resources available to us, such as trainings like this, connecting with our colleagues and local community expert, not only builds our capacity to conduct a successful needs assessment, but also helps ensure that we have a clear goal in mind. And I think that's a structure that sets a strong foundation of our work as advisors. So that's the end of my presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irene. Wonderful sort of overall touching on all the points, pulling it all together. I really like that graphic that you shared at the end. A lot of useful takeaways. So we have a few minutes for questions from the audience here for Irene. Please go ahead. You can put it in the chat, but we encourage you to come off mute and just say your question or comment. I'm always reminded to leave some space and time for people to think and come off mute. Recently, I heard sing happy birthday in your head, so I just did that. Well, there's definitely lots of kudos in the chat. All right, well, Irene's going to stay with us for the rest of the program, and you know where to find her in the organization. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Thanks again, Irene. I'm going to come back to share an example from Grace Woodmansee, also a relatively new advisor, and she's going to be sharing an informal approach up in the north in a rural community. So let me make sure the sound and the video is clear.
Good morning. My name is Grace Woodmansee, and I'm the Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor in Siskiyou County. I'm sorry that I couldn't join live today, but I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about how I approach my needs assessment. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of background about Siskiyou County. We're located in far northern California on the Oregon border, and Siskiyou is very rural. The total population of our county is less than 44,000 people, but we do have these really kind of ecologically and culturally distinct valleys that increase in elevation and decrease in precipitation as you move from west to east across the county. So there are differences in production systems and goals between these valleys, but overall, the ranching community is fairly traditional and is dominated by multi-generation commercial cow-calf producers with large herd sizes. And according to the most recent ag census, 96% of ranch owners in Siskiyou County are white and 56% are men. So Vikram and Catherine had asked me to talk specifically about how I connected with the direct-to-consumer community and built out my programming to serve these DTC folks through my needs assessment. So I'll touch on that throughout my presentation, but I wanted to just describe a little bit about this community in Siskiyou County. So we have this kind of emergent community of ranchers who are creating direct-to-consumer operations, whether they be newcomers that are first-generation ranchers to Siskiyou or the children of those traditional Siskiyou County ranching families that are returning to the ranch and need a way to support their own families. So they're essentially developing a new enterprise within an existing commercial ranching operation. And the business models for these direct-to-consumer operations are very diverse. They range from pretty low intensity selling shares of beef that's primarily through word of mouth within the county to very elaborate and focused marketing and selling cuts direct to consumer through shipping and online sales. But importantly, these direct-to-consumer businesses are often run by women and or first-generation ranchers. So it's an important clientele group to serve with our programming for sure. So looking more broadly at my needs assessment approach, I began my position in January of 21, still kind of during an intense part of the pandemic. So a lot of our traditional events and kind of meetings weren't taking place. So my needs assessment began with just phone calls for the most part. And I think that's part of why I chose to develop a fairly informal kind of semi-structured interview approach, because I was already making cold calls. I didn't want my questions to be coming across as, you know, kind of too sterile or too research oriented. I really wanted to have conversations with people that felt genuine, and learn more about them while also collecting some useful information for my program. And in addition to that, I also attended as many meetings with support organizations, community events, board meetings, workshops as I could, and really leaned into taking advantage of press releases and opportunity to do interviews just to get my name out there and help make connections early on. So by the summer of 2021, the first year I started, I connected with our Siskiyou Economic Development Council and quickly knew that they would just be awesome program partners, and they still are to this day. So I began meeting with their team semi-regularly and pretty informally, and also attending their events. And then in February of 2022, I was awarded some funding for a new research project that was focused entirely on the direct-to-consumer community after learning more about that community through my needs assessment and also in working with the Siskiyou EDC. It just seemed like there was kind of a lot of untapped potential working with that community that definitely has different needs than the traditional commercial producers of Siskiyou County. So our summer cattlemen's tour in 2022 was totally focused on direct-to-consumer producers, which was so fun. The tour was in Scott Valley, and I got to work with an amazing group of direct-to-consumer ranchers and their families to plan that tour. And I think building those relationships with those producers by working closely with them to plan this event, which was very fun and ended up being fairly successful. I think that really helped solidify, you know, making connections with those direct-to-consumer ranches led to other connections with direct-to-consumer folks, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So I currently host a decent amount of direct-to-consumer specific events, and I've also started trying to target my programming more for small ruminant producers and first-generation ranchers. And then also try to just keep up my relationships and networking with those direct-to-consumer clientele as often as I can. So I think in terms of why I chose the kind of semi-structured, informal needs assessment approach from the get-go is just because of the program I have in the county that I live in. Siskiyou definitely appreciates informal but genuine, and I think there is a lot of survey fatigue and a little bit of kind of researcher energy fatigue, and I guess I just really wanted to prioritize learning over publishing, and I think leading with genuine interest in learning about the community you've just joined is going to serve you better in the long term than developing a really you know, tight needs assessment that can be published down the road. So in terms of my question development, I did keep it really simple with my needs assessment. I had 5 very basic questions that I asked folks that I hoped could inspire broader conversations. And my goal was to just understand what issues Siskiyou County ranchers were most worried about. And in addition to making an initial introduction, and that initial introduction often led to an invite to the rancher to do a visit or go to a meeting or something like that. So, I mean, one example of this, I thought for sure that wildfire was going to be top of mind for most Siskiyou County ranchers, as a lot of ranchers here are also public land permittees and have cows turned out on the forest during the summer. But, you know, wildfire really wasn't a concern for most people. above and beyond, the number one issue was water, which after having lived in Siskiyou for almost 4 years, that completely makes sense to me. But at the time, I really thought that I would get more interest in kind of wildfire related topics. So I did ask other livestock advisor colleagues for their feedback and advice on how to develop and kind of just approach my needs assessment. And felt pretty strongly from the beginning that I did not want to send a survey out via mail. I just felt like the response rate would be too poor, and that most of what I was trying to accomplish here was relationship building so that the conversations could be continued and the needs assessment could continue to be evolved. And then it did really help to take advantage of the first cattlemen's tour that I planned. So I turned that kind of semi-structured interview format into a paper survey that I passed out during the barbecue lunch. And I think being there as a trusted affiliate of the Siskiyou County Cattlemen's Association was helpful. I doubled my response rate just by passing out those surveys at the Cattlemen's Tour. But I think, again, that the timing here made a big difference. If I'd passed that survey out during the first month of my job, I don't know, maybe it would have gone a little bit differently. So how do I use or how did I use the information I collected in my needs assessment to develop my program? Well, I think that my needs assessment was definitely just a starting point. And on the direct-to-consumer side, those kind of initial connections and conversations were really all about relationship building. And that has continued to be a through line working with the direct-to-consumer community today. And I think building those relationships led with some connections in 2023 with first-generation ranchers and small ruminant producers who were not connected to Extension. And I've only planned one event specifically for small ruminant producers so far last fall, but hope to build out my small ruminant specific programming with events and other resources in the future. And I think in terms of prioritizing needs and deciding which issues to focus on, I knew pretty quickly that leaning into learning more about the direct-to-consumer community would be a good kind of first project as an advisor. And I think what I learned from that research project that I'm wrapping up right now will direct the next steps for how I approach my programming for the DTC community. In terms of the overall needs assessment, those initial conversations were helpful and really did help inform some small scale research projects. And then the relationships I've built with those projects and the lessons learned from them are being leveraged into larger projects now. And I think overall, as a new advisor, working with the direct-to-consumer community was great in terms of meeting ranchers who were less engaged with cooperative extension, but also it was a non-controversial topic just to get going with as a new advisor. I mean, wolves and water and dam removal, there's a lot in Siskiyou County that is very, very controversial, and it takes some time to determine what the best course of action is for extension to be involved with those issues. So I think working with the direct-to-consumer community was not controversial. They're a really fun group to work with. They're creative and really excited about putting together events and thinking differently about how we approach problems. So for all of those reasons, it was the perfect way to kind of dive in and get involved as a new advisor. So overall, in terms of lessons learned, I think a lot of my fellow advisors told me to not burn people out with a long survey for my needs assessment, and that was 100% great advice. I think connecting early, often, and strategically is really helpful regardless of your approach. Attending as many community events as possible, I think, is really helpful. And then targeted event invites. I've learned that with the small ruminant community, not just sending out announcements in my newsletter list, although all of those folks are now subscribers, they weren't before they attended tours and workshops that I've put together. So making the effort to extend the invite individually, I think makes a difference. And then in terms of just the overall needs assessment, I would say for new advisors, don't worry about finishing a complete publication worthy needs assessment in your first 6 months. Definitely focus on meeting people in person and just helping and getting involved any way you can, and the rest will unfold over time. I really do think that in the beginning, trust is more important than a perfect understanding of needs. And that's kind of how I've continued to guide staying up to date about how needs are evolving. I continue to volunteer and attend events that are, some totally work related and some that are truly volunteer, where sometimes, the most productive conversations are had at the volunteer booth making sandwiches at the Montague Rodeo. I also try to make time for quote unquote unproductive phone calls and to really listen when people are being candid in the cab of a truck on a ranch visit, or when you're trying to, collect data or find, a plant that someone wants you to ID. I've definitely had a lot of really productive conversations with folks in those circumstances and learned a ton about their needs when I wasn't expecting to. And I've also started feeling comfortable asking trusted clientele for their advice on future program direction. And I do think that it's important to remember, especially with some of the issues we're confronted with today, they can't all be addressed by extension, but it's still definitely worth listening to the perspectives of our clientele regardless. So I hope this has been helpful. This obviously is just one experience navigating a needs assessment in a rural place like Siskiyou, but I would be happy to talk to anyone that is thinking of, deploying something similar in a rural place. Please feel free to get in touch. And thank you again for the opportunity to share.
All right. Well, we are grateful for Grace for recording that for us with her last minute need to go do jury duty. So I hope you all enjoyed learning from colleagues that are both new, like many of you. I know we don't have Grace here to answer any questions, but I wonder if anybody had any kind of takeaways that you wanted to share, or maybe a general question that the rest of us can address before we go into our breakouts.
I just wanted to say thank you. And I think that last presentation, I'm among the others, but the biggest key as a county director is the relationship piece. And so making sure that everything that we do is about building relationships, and sometimes it means less formal or whatever it is. So that relationships piece is really important for especially county directors, because whatever our advisors do in the counties comes back to us when we're going to board of supervisors and things like that to gain support for cooperative extension as a whole. So I appreciate that part.
Thanks, Jolynn, for echoing that. I really do hope one of the several, hopefully, takeaways that our newest members get from today is indeed that the organization understands the time that it takes and really values developing those relationships. And that can definitely be integrated in your needs assessment, which certainly can be informal. There's a whole spectrum. There's no one right way. The other thing I was really thinking from what Grace said too, and Irene as well, is active listening. And that's a skill that covers kind of all extension competencies, is really being a good listener and learning from the communities that we work with. So anyway, speaking of listening and learning from peers, our next and last activity of the training is to do some peer-to-peer learning. You all have a lot of valuable experience. I know some of you may be brand new, but many of you have been on the job even for just a few months, learning what Grace had started to do. I know everybody has some experience, you have some questions. So what we're going to do is Maria from the Program Support Unit is going to open up some breakout rooms. We've organized them by kind of broad program areas, having looked at who registered, which is a little bit different than who's actually able to show up. So we'll see how this goes. If you end up in a breakout room by yourself, don't worry, we'll bring you back and put you in another breakout room. As I mentioned at the outset, Vikram, myself, Jen, and Shiavash will all go in to rooms just to see if you have any questions and if we can help guide the conversation. We've been with the organization and know this content a bit, so just want to make sure everybody's having fruitful discussions. So excuse us popping in and out. We're just trying to be helpful. So in your breakout room, please take the time to introduce yourself. Let me just move this aside. Thank you, Maria, for opening the breakout rooms. Talk about where you are in your needs assessment approach. Many of you are just starting to think about it. That is completely fine. If you have a thought now that just came up about maybe a data collection method that you might use and why, please share that. If you have thoughts about how you're going to use your needs assessment, is it primarily to develop relationships that are new to you? Are you thinking with colleagues about trying to publish? Hopefully you've seen a spectrum of ways that you can use this information. Are you thinking about using it to apply for a grant, whatnot?
Yeah, nothing from my breakout room unless Alec or Ellie want to share something.
As folks are thinking, I'll share what we were kind of a main thrust of our discussion. This was in the working landscapes and water room, and I think it holds true for many is when you get started, it's so large, often the geography, the area of expertise, and you're sort of told, you know, figure out what you're going to focus on. And, you know, we really hope that you can leverage this needs assessment exercise exactly to do that. So by working with community partners, looking at secondary data that's available, thinking about your own expertise, looking at your job description, you know, those priority filters that I mentioned can really be helpful for you to focus, and that it'll be okay to say no to some things as you develop your program, because you can't be everything to everyone. So I just wanted that to be like another takeaway, is that the organization understands, and for your own sanity, my words, and your own sustainability with our organization is, you know, helping you really focus as you develop your program. Jolynn?
I just want to thank you as somebody who's been around for a while. Again, I was here to listen to what you had to say, so I wasn't giving opposite information. But I think what's really important for new advisors is taking the time. There really isn't an expectation of anything other than a needs assessment that first 6 months. And I know that sometimes it can sound or feel weird that you're, you know, maybe, you know, not producing anything in that amount of time, but really just showing up to places and just sitting and being is a perfectly valid way to build these relationships and start that needs assessment. And so I think just making it clear that you really that's the only thing you really have to do for at least 6 months. So don't put too much pressure on yourself.
Thanks so much, Jolynn. And it may take longer if there was no position and nobody there before you, et cetera, but that's a really good guide, and appreciate the county director perspective. Well, with I think
one quick question that came up in our group was, for needs assessment, is there a PI required if people who are doing the assessments are community educator or community education supervisors? Is there some sort of A&R expectation about who can serve as the lead for needs assessments?
I see Irene shaking her head. You may know, I don't know the answer to that. That question hasn't come up. Maybe Jolynn can. I would imagine that the community educators would work with their advisors as academic guides. Jolynn?
So I don't, only advisors technically can be PIs. There is some exceptions, but you don't really need PI status for a needs assessment. You could potentially go through IRB to get approval if you plan on publishing, But this is really, there's no PI status, there's nothing that you need to go through in order to do these questions and things like that. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
I think
Definitely.
for Catherine, for nutrition programs, specifically CalFresh, because of the funding nature, our staff are actually not allowed to do the research component of the program. So, I mean, echoing what Jolene said, typically it would be the advisors doing the research aspect of the work if there's a need to do a needs assessment for those programs.
Thank you both.
If the CESs have, you know, if you have a survey or something, or you want to interview the CESs based on their experience in the classrooms and things like that, that's another good way to get that similar kind of data.
Great question. I see we're right at noon, and we really do want your feedback so we can improve this training for next year. Vikram, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I just put the evaluation survey, very brief survey, a link in the chat. Please take a couple of minutes before you leave to provide us with feedback, and we use it for next year's training. And then in the follow-up email that will come out, we'll share all the handouts and the resources that are available for you. And then we are available for technical assistance also. Catherine and I can review, Kit always also. We can review your surveys, like the needs assessment surveys. Or if you just want to talk about any needs assessment, even if you're not at a stage where you are writing a survey or an interview schedule, please feel free to reach out, and we can schedule and talk more about your particular project. So I put the link in the chat. Please take a couple of minutes to provide your feedback.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So for in the past, for anonymous surveys, we didn't have to get IRB approval. Is that still the case?
I think it's basically, it's not related to whether a survey is anonymous or not, but it is more about the questions being asked. The IRB has to be done for that purpose, especially if you want to publish in peer-reviewed publications where the intention is to contribute to the existing knowledge base, then we need an IRB. It's not about the questions being anonymous or not. Yeah.
Oh,
Correct.
okay.
If it's for internal assessment and program improvement only, then you do not need IRB. If you in any way think you may publish it down the road, then you would want IRB.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And shares, as Catherine pasted in the chat, we have a new IRB training this year. We added that, so you can join if you have.
Oh, perfect. Is it part of the weekly on Tuesday thing?
Yeah,
Or it's
yeah.
separate?
This is a new,
perfect.
yeah, new training that we added this year.
Oh, perfect.
Because we have been
perfect.
getting more requests about
Yes,
IRB.
yes. No, this is great. Thank you so much.
So it will be like a 2-hour session only for IRB. Okay, I think Catherine, it's 12:03. So you want to close the training?
Yes, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming. We are a resource here for you. You will get more resources in the follow-up email. Please do complete that evaluation survey that Vikram put in the chat. We really do take it very seriously. And nice to meet you new folks, and we'll see you hopefully another time during the series. So thanks everybody, and thanks again, Irene.